Thank you very much. Hello everyone. My name is Marcos Placona. There's a slide about me with all my information, all my Twitters and everything. So if you want to find me, or if you want to find some of the codes I'm going to show you today, you will be able to find on that page. I also work for a company called Twilio. Who's not heard about Twilio here? All right. So Twilio is a communications API that helps developers adding SMS messages, voice, video, and chat into their applications. Okay, so imagine you have an application and you wanted to make a phone call, or you have an application you wanted to send a text message. Twilio can help you doing that. But I'm not here today to talk about Twilio, so I'll be happy to talk to you about Twilio later if you have any questions. But today I'm going to talk to you about IoT. So who's played with some IoT stuff in the past? Who's used Android in the past? Cool. Now, can I just have a show of hands? Cool. Yeah, I'm just checking everyone has hands, so that's all good. Because some people didn't raise their hands, so everyone has hands, so that's good. Awesome. So I'm going to talk to you about Android Things and what Android Things is. Android Things is basically an extension of the Android ecosystem. Okay, so all of the things that you could do with Android before, which were like phones and watches and TVs and cars, you can now do them with IoT. So you can now do them with things that aren't any of these things. You can do them with boards, you can take them out, and you can build stuff like this. So you can build cameras, you can build points of sales, you can build security systems. So it's basically taking your skills, taking the skills you already have with Android, if you have those skills, and being able to apply them to a field that maybe you've not been applying in the past. Now, the greatest thing about Android Things is, first, it runs on the things that if you've been doing Android, it runs on the same things that you've used before. So you can use your Android Studio, same thing that you've been using before. You can obviously use Android, you can use Firebase, you can use Google Cloud, you can even use Kotlin. Is anyone excited about Kotlin here? Great, because I'm going to show you some Kotlin examples as well later. But now, cool. I told you, this is not my slide, this is me. So I told you about Android Things and the places where you can run it. So the idea with Android Things is you move away from a phone. Like you're not going to be using a phone anymore, you're going to move away and you're going to use something else. And I'm going to tell you about what this something else actually is. So you have some boards in here. So you have the NXP boards. The NXP boards are pretty cool. They're very easy to get. But you also have, at the end here, you have a Raspberry Pi. And the examples I'm going to be showing you today, I'll be writing on a Raspberry Pi. I'll be running those examples on a Raspberry Pi. Because Raspberry Pi is really my favorite. And I'll tell you why Raspberry Pi is my favorite, because it's got a great community. Okay, so every single time I had an issue with a Raspberry Pi, or I didn't know how something worked, I could just go to that community and ask them. Like if I didn't know how the inputs and outputs worked or something, I could just go and ask them. Whereas when you talk about the NXP stuff, the community is not as mature as the Raspberry Pi community. Not yet. Now, the other thing about that is running a Raspberry Pi is cheap. Okay, so you are talking about 35 euros to get a Raspberry Pi. Whereas when you look at the other examples I showed you, you're looking between 50, 60 euros. Okay, so I'm very happy to have a Raspberry Pi stuck to my door, for example, because it only cost me 35 euros. It's only doing this one thing, but it's over there. I'm not quite happy to say I'm going to put 65 euros behind my door. Okay, so it's kind of like half the price. The other reason why I'm talking about Raspberry Pis here is because you probably already have one in a drawer. Okay? I, for one, had Raspberry Pi since the very beginning, and a lot of them were just gathering dust. So being able to do something with a Raspberry Pi using a technology I already know, not having to learn Python. Nothing against Python, but like Raspberry Pi examples, they're mostly in Python. So not having to learn Python and use the technologies I already knew was very inviting to me. It was very interesting. Now, how do you get started with Android Things? What are the things you need to do? So the first one, you need a Raspberry Pi. Okay? Once you've got your Raspberry Pi, you are going to get a memory card, so you can get any memory card you have lying around that you can stick to a Raspberry Pi. You're going to put it on the Raspberry Pi, and then you're going to make sure that you download Android Studio, because this is where you're going to be writing most of your stuff. You then move on to actually program your Raspberry Pi. So program your SD cards. So there is an installer that you can download from the Google websites, from the Android Things websites. And this installer is basically, it does a few things. So you run it, so there's a file that you run. And once you run that file, it's going to go and ask you what to do. Like, where are you installing this? Are you installing that on a Raspberry Pi? What do you want me to do? So you basically tell it what to do. Once you've told it what to do, it will ask you for some more information about what to download and everything. So this is not important. Like, this is probably in the right size. So it will ask you about some information, and then it's going to start downloading stuff. Okay. So you don't have to do anything. You don't need to like plug this and plug out and do all the crazy stuff you generally need to do, because it's going to do everything for you. Okay. Now, the last thing it will do is it will start installing this image for you. So it will unzip and everything. So it will get the latest image for you. And by the way, we're talking about the default image here. If you wanted to turn this thing into a product, for example, you can create your own image. Much like people do with Linux images, for example, like custom images, you can have a custom image for this. In that case, you can even push those images via cloud to your devices. And then, once you're done, you should see something like this. Okay, so this is your home screen on the Raspberry Pi, right? So everything in here is sort of like clickable. You can do things with this, but this is your home screen. So this is telling me, okay, it's installed. What are the next steps? The next step is what I'm going to show. Well, I'm going to try and show you right now. So I'm going to switch my screen here to mirroring. And I'm going to open my Android Studio. So I have an Android Studio. Is the font okay? Can you see it from the back? Yeah, okay. Cool. So I have Android Studio here. It's currently not doing much. I have a project created. So this is an empty project, okay? There's nothing on it. This is how you will get a project once you start with your thing. So it doesn't really do anything. And what I am going to do is I'm going to add a couple of libraries here. So you can see I've already got Kotlin running here. I'm going to add Android Things. So I'm running the latest version of Android Things here, 1.0. And I'm also going to add a button. So much like what you do when you import a library into your projects, we're now importing the button library. So the button is basically a driver, okay? I want to show you how to control a button later. So that's why we're doing this. Next up, if you have done some Android, you will be familiar with the Android manifest. The only thing I did in here is I got permissions to use the peripheral I/O. So I'm basically saying, hey, I'm going to be using some hardware here. I'm going to be hooking up some hardware to you. So that's basically me asking for that permission. And then I have this activity, which doesn't really have anything, okay? Like I said, when you do your first thing, when you create your projects, you're going to have something very similar to this. Now, with that, I'm going to go into here, and I'm going to try and create a very simple thing, just make sure I'm connected and everything is running as it should be. So I'm going to create a variable here. I'm going to call that service. And that variable will use the peripheral manager, and I'm going to get an instance of it. Okay? So that's basically me telling the Raspberry Pi, hey, I'm going to be using your inputs and outputs in here. And let's just check. Let's just check that we have access to this. So service.gpio list. So I'm going to try and list the GPIO here, and I'm going to just put GPIOs in here so we know where it is. And hopefully, if I try and run, so as you can see, I can now see my Raspberry Pi, which I'll show you later because I've got a little camera here. I can now see my Raspberry Pi in here as an Android device. Okay, this is nothing more than an Android device. I'm going to click OK, and this thing is going to compile. It's going to install, and it's installing on the Raspberry Pi that is down here. And hopefully, when it finishes doing it, yeah. So you can see at the very bottom here, I've got the GPIOs, BCM 10, 11, 12. So these are all the GPIOs, okay? Now, I keep on saying inputs and outputs, and I keep on saying GPIO, and you might be like, what the hell is that? It's okay, we're gonna go through that. I'm gonna explain that to you. But I just wanted to make sure that we could build a very simple app here. We're gonna make it slightly more complex in a bit, but I'll go back to my slides. Cool, so this was a backup in case this didn't work, so I had a video. So I'm gonna skip that. But we have been very free of any kind of hardware so far. We haven't really used any external hardware. Like, I connected to my Raspberry Pi, and that was it. So I didn't do anything else. So if you've not played with hardware before, I'm going to give you a very quick hardware 101. This is like just some of the things we're going to look at. So I've been talking about peripherals. I've been talking about GPIOs. GPIOs are general purpose inputs and outputs. So those are the outputs you have access to. Those are the pins on the Raspberry Pi that you have access to do things. Things such as if I want to turn on an LED, or if I want to make sure that the button I'm clicking is doing something. So this is your place. This is where you can actually plug things and control different things. Like, you can get access to different hardware. Because so far, we've only had the Raspberry Pi there. Now, a few other things you're going to see if you start playing with IoT. So this is not just an Android things thing. This is like IoT or electronics in general. You will see things like breadboards. Breadboards are basically a non-committal way of prototyping, okay? Because all you do is, instead of like doing all the soldering and everything, you just use cables, just like those jumper wires you can see over there, and you plug them into the breadboards. And that way, you're not having to solder anything. So if you mess up, you can just move them around. So jumper wires, we talked about it. Resistors. So resistors is like, sometimes you have a lot of current. You know, it's the idea of, I have a light bulb and it's 110 volts because I brought it from America, and then I try and connect it here and it explodes. Okay, so resistance is your way to control how much current is actually passing through. I have to say one important thing, because like when I started with like Android things and Raspberry Pis and stuff, I didn't really know much about things, okay? So I saw the resistors and I was like, oh, they are nicely colored. I'll just like color code them and like color match. No, as it happens, the colors actually matter, okay? So remember that. The second thing is LEDs. So if you want to get things blinking, if you want to get shiny things, you want to get a bunch of LEDs in your application, okay? The other thing you're going to see is you're going to see some prototypes just like this. So this is a free application called Fritzing. And Fritzing is what you use to, if you want to document something, or if you don't know how to connect things, you can look at those prototypes with Fritzing. In this example, we have a button over there. We have a resistor. And then we have that connected to our Raspberry Pi. But I just thought that instead of just showing you the picture, or instead of just showing you this, I just give you another demo to show you how to get access to a button, okay? So let me go. Let me head back to my IDE here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable that is going to hold my button, okay? I haven't started this variable yet, so I'm just going to do a lit init var. This is going to be button, and it's going to be of type button. If you have done Androids in the past, you will know that usually you would just show the widget button. But because we are talking about an external button, we want to make sure we select the second one, which is the contrib driver. So this is the button driver. So we're not dealing with screens here. We are dealing with actual buttons, like actual hardware. Cool. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate this button now. So I'm going to say button is equals button. I'm going to pass a pin. So pin are the GPIOs that we talked about. So I know I'm connected to BCM5 here. And now I'm going to say what happens when I push the button, because buttons have logic states. So with logic states, you can say, well, the button is pressed when low, when it's actually pushed. Or it's pressed when high. So I'm going to say pressed when low. So when you push the button, I want something to happen. I don't want something to happen when you release the button. But you have that kind of control as well. Now, with this button, I am going to So I'm going to add an event listener to the button. So when you push the button, something should happen. This event listener, I am going to just change it so whenever I push the button, I log that message. So the message that we logged the other time. Okay. So super simple. I'm using Android here. I'm not using anything that is different. Like I'm using different libraries, but this is the same API you may have already known from before. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I close this button to be a good citizen. So when we close the application, then the button gets released. Again, it's going to ask me, do I want to install it to my Android things? I'm going to say yes, and then it's going to do its thing. Now, when that's completed, I should be able to hopefully so you can see the hardware on the screen in here. And I know it's kind of difficult to see, but you can see my foot in here. Yep. So the hardware on the screen is basically a Raspberry Pi and a button. And what should happen in here is we program this button in a way that when I push it, I want to see a message at the bottom here. So hopefully, when I do that, yeah, so I see a message at the bottom, okay? So I push the button. So that's me coming out of what Android actually is, like, you know, running on a phone, and I'm running that on a device, on a different device that I have. And the possibilities are like endless in here because there's a bunch of cool things I could do. Cool, we'll look at buttons again in a minute. Now, cool, so this was my backup in case things didn't work out. You don't need to look at that anymore. Cool, so code, what have we done? So we've done a couple of things here. So we have added a couple of libraries here. So we have the Android GPIO library. So this is an import, and we have our driver for the button. So the button that we just used, and lastly we just created our application. I think this example is in. Yeah, no, it's also in Kotlin. But I will show you an example in Java as well. So if Kotlin is not your thing and you want to do it in Java, you can totally do that in Java as well. But I want to say that the important thing in here is all of those drivers that we keep on talking about, buttons and everything, they are drivers that people can contribute to, okay? So if you want to go and add a new state to a button, for example, these are all things that you can do. Like, it's all open source. In fact, there's a bunch of libraries for things that you can do. So some of the libraries, if you can't see, you have libraries for like servos. You have libraries for things like buzzers and like, you know, whatever you want to do, really. There's a bunch of libraries, and the list just goes on. Like you have a bunch of things. But the coolest thing as well about this is like you have libraries that Google sort of like provided you with, some of those drivers. The coolest thing for me is like you can actually create your own driver. So say, for example, you have these really complex, so you may be like an electrical engineer or something, and you have this really complex sensor, and there's no driver for it because no one went and wrote a driver. So you can just write that yourself. And in fact, this is exactly what I did. So I wanted to build myself a binary clock, okay? And to drive a binary clock, you need a bunch of LEDs, like a bunch of them. So driving a bunch of LEDs is not very simple when you have like limited inputs and outputs, like. So I found out there was this thing called the Max7219, which is this little guy in here, and there was no driver for that. And because there was no driver, I decided to go and write my own driver, okay? Now, I am not an electrical engineer, okay? Like, most of the time when I was doing things in here, I was like, am I gonna blow something up? But I didn't. So all there is to say that anyone can do it. Like, well, most people can do it. Now, the stuff that is managed by Google, so the stuff that isn't specifically those drivers, is all this. So this is like sort of the landscape of when you look at Android, what Android is. And when you look at Android things, some things go away. Things that go away in Android things are like calendars and so you have calendars, you have browser, you have messaging phone. Like, this is not a phone. Like, this is not supposed to be a phone. It's supposed to be something that you control other things with, okay? And the other thing is, like, displays are very optional in here. And I really like that displays are optional because I can't stand having this thing stuck to my door with a display on it. Okay, I don't want to have that. So displays are optional. You don't need to connect to a display. Now we have some minutes. We have about 4 minutes now. So I'm gonna quickly show you another demo of something slightly more complex that I built, and hopefully it's gonna work. So on this one, I'm just gonna tell a quick story. I work from home most days, so I work from home most of the time, and I'm usually listening to very loud music. Listening to very loud music is great for when you're programming, but like the mailman, they don't like that because they knock on your door and obviously you don't hear. And I had this problem, okay? Like they would come to my door, they would try and deliver me something, and I just wouldn't hear it. Now, my solution to that was, well, okay, so I can't, I could have a camera on the door or something. But the one thing I always have in front of me, wherever I am, is I have my phone. So what I thought I could do was, can I change my doorbell so when the mailman pushes the button on my doorbell, can my phone ring? So that was the idea. So that was the idea of what I wanted to build. So not really just using the doorbell as it is, but I wanted my phone to ring as well. And this is when I built this application here, okay? It's a super simple application. It doesn't do much. You have, same Android things stuff downloaded. This is the endpoints I created, so I'm using retrofit in here, and I have a serverless function that my application should call. So basically, whenever someone pushes a button or whenever someone pushes my doorbell, I want this endpoint to be called. Some information is passed to it, and then I get a call on my phone. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and make sure that I'm not. So I just want to make sure that I'm not using the same. Yeah, so I had it installed here, so I'm going to uninstall. And I'm going to uninstall the other thing as well. Cool. So I'm going to try and install this thing here. And it's supposed to work the same way, okay? So we're going to be using the same prototype I have in here, which is with the button. And when I push that button, I want to see my phone ringing. I'm going to put the ringer on as well. And hopefully. Okay. So when the phone rings, and I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this.
Somebody at the door.
So that's kind of the idea, okay? So I have that button, it can be pushed, and then I get a call on my phone. Now, some of the other things that we've done. So let me stop this and start this again. Cool. So I'm kind of done with demos here because I realize I have about 10 seconds now. So I just want to. So this is the story. I'm basically like explaining the story. So if you want to read about it, if you want to try and rebuild it yourself, there's a story there. I built something else which I call the high five machine. And the idea with the high five machine is every single time I get a new follower on Twitter, I get a high five. You can go and build stuff like controlling your light bulbs as well. If you have like Philips Hue, you can tap to the API and you can control things. The last thing I built was I play Magic the Gathering, okay? And I was actually talking to Oleg today, the previous speaker, and it was like, you must have like a ton of cards because I've been playing for like 20 years. And I'm like, yeah, I do. So the one problem with playing Magic the Gathering and having a ton of cards is, how do you know like which cards you have? How do you keep control of like how much they're worth? So I built this thing out of Legos and the Raspberry Pi. What it does is, it makes the card, so it starts like this, and then it makes the card slide to the end, takes a picture of it, it uses Google Cloud Vision to do an OCR, so it gets the name of the card, and then it uses the Magic API to add it to a database and get the price and everything. So there's a bunch of things you can do. There's a bunch of things you can do for fun, and like I love doing those kind of things, and I do it for work as well, which is great. Now, this is what Android Things is. So it's the power of Android. It is managed by Google, and it's secure, which is the biggest problem with IoT. With that, I realize I'm a minute and a half later, so thank you very much. So I don't want to stay between you and coffee. I will be out there. If you have any questions, please just feel free to come and ask me. You can all go for coffee now.